Welcome to Indications and Warnings, everyone, with Chuck Pfarrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this show on December 16. It is day 1392 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Chuck and I are going to get to the maps today, but the place we really want to begin is in the Russian seaport of Novorossiysk, because that is where, once again, the Ukrainians surprised the Russians with their ability to do the unimaginable, Chuck.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some new people being transferred to Pokrovsk from the harbor security detail of beautiful Novorossiysk. What we have here is another Kilo-class submarine. These are diesel-electric boats. They are pretty well constructed, pretty capable, and they are capable of firing about 6 caliber missiles. Interestingly enough, these boats are, most submarines have a weapons handling hatch that allows the torpedoes to sort of go in at a 45-degree angle and get loaded into the torpedo room. These Russian boats at pierside, they open the outer torpedo doors and they're actually fed in like you'd load a musket into a flintlock rifle. This particular boat was attacked by an underwater, a subsurface unmanned vessel. And Alan and I were talking before the show, if this had been a SEAL swimmer delivery operation, it still would have been magnificent. And that would be, we come in one of our wet submersibles, navigate through the nets and the barriers and the booms and everything else, get to the submarine and implant a charge, and then of course you have to get out. That's amazing enough, but to do it by remote control, Alan, was really amazing.
It's to do it by remote control, and then to watch the operation unfold through Russian surveillance cameras, which the Ukrainians obviously hacked into. I mean, everything about this operation was magnificent. The distance, the strike, how small and tight that seaport is that you have to navigate into, and then to watch the whole thing on basically Russian TV.
Yeah, we used to do this reverse state planning in the SEALs, and you come up with an idea and you're banging it around and you brief it back, and the skipper will say, go with that option. And you literally start at the end. Where is the pizza and beer going to come from for the debrief? And you work backwards. And it's remarkable. You miss less things when you go backwards. But the Ukrainians literally said, okay, we got this great op. How are we going to do it? And someone said, how are we going to film it? Then they said, let's hack into the harbor surveillance camp. Completely amazing. This submersible, as it came into the harbor, the first trick of magic, and I can't really explain how they did it, is they got through a series of anti-boat booms and nets. Now, these nets are generally, there are torpedo nets. They're kind of bigger and heavier to stop a torpedo. And then they go through various gradations of fishing nets, which are designed as anti-swimmer nets. Somehow, magically, this vehicle got through the nets, which is amazing. Now, this is one more thing. So this wasn't just like some smart torpedo. I won't say how I'm familiar with obstacle avoidance sonar. So when this thing came in, it had to navigate throughout the military. It's a naval operations base. It isn't just a harbor. It's like Norfolk, Virginia. And they made a turn into the sub-basin. And almost every military, they segregate their submarines from their surface vessels. It's easier for logistics, et cetera. So this unmanned vessel came into the submarine berthing area, and I looked at this and I figured out that, look, they navigated for that corner of the sub area. So the obstacle avoidance sonar was telling them, I'm getting contacts here forward, I'm getting contacts to my starboard side, and they knew if they aimed for the corner that would put them in the vicinity of the rudders and propeller of this particular boat.
It is amazing. I mean, we don't actually know if the Russians had nets and booms and barriers out. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if this is something they either neglected or maybe the squad responsible for this port protection, they just sold the nets or, pocketed the money.
I think probably that they're inland undersea warfare is what this is called in the Navy, the defending against SEALs branch. And I bet all that stuff got left in Sevastopol when they pulled out.
Good point.
That's right. If someone got a billion rubles to harden the defenses here at Novorossiysk, you're damn right. It went to buying a chateau in San Moritz.
Exactly. Yeah, and this is the second sub that Ukraine has sunk in the Black Sea. The first one is in dry dock at Sevastopol, right?
Yes, it's at the bottom of a flooded dry dock. That was the submarine Rostov-na-Donu, and Alan and I were talking this before the show. Folks, Rostov-na-Donu was involved in a massacre where they fired 4 caliber cruise missiles at a village in Ukraine, and they killed about 60 or 70 civilians. We've all heard of the submarine captain who was killed out for a jog in Novorossiysk. He had been the captain of Rostov-na-Donu. Wow. And the previous Kilo submarine that was destroyed, hit in 2 attacks and finally, decimated. Guess what submarine that was? It was Rostov-na-Donu. So the Ukrainians, they have a very long memory and a very long reach.
Yep. Well, there's no other place for the Russian Black Sea Fleet to go. This is it. This is their last base, Novorossiysk, just basically in the vicinity of the Kerch Bridge. It's as far east as you can go in the Black Sea.
Yeah, absolutely. Any farther east and you're in the steppe. So, look, this is definitely, these guys are in this base right now and they know nothing is safe.
Yeah.
Nothing. And there is at least one more Kilo boat in this base, and I sure as hell wouldn't want to be standing a watch on that tonight.
No. They should move it to the Caspian Sea, maybe.
Yeah, they should actually. The interesting thing, and we were talking about this, these Kilo-class submarines can actually be transitioned up the Volga River. They were built to do that. And the other thing is you can't go to Submarines R Us and get this thing fixed.
Yeah.
Right? They need to go to Electric Boat in Groton, Connecticut. That's about the nearest place I think that they could maybe get this thing fixed.
Well, the Russians went to extraordinary lengths to disguise the fate of this Kilo sub. And we don't know if it's on the bottom. We don't know if it's flooded. We don't know the extent of the damage. But the Russians clearly don't want anyone to know.
Yeah, and the Russians, I will say this, you hear me shit-talking the Russians constantly, but one thing I will absolutely praise them for, no one in the world is better at cognitive warfare, information warfare. And they have already put out at least 4 or 5 different videos and satellite photos that prove the boat wasn't hit. Interestingly, one guy's standing right next to the submarine and saying, look, it's perfectly fine. And I noticed there isn't even any rubble. They managed to sweep the pier.
Yeah.
And then there was another alleged satellite photo released by Russia that shows the locus of the explosion about 50 yards in, on land. And it's an external crater. So we're not going to know for a while. But I predicated my battle damage assessments, and Thomas, of course, will put those up. Those are predicated on the early press releases, the first people who got there with commercially available satellite image, which admittedly is not up to standards. But That happened before the Russians could get their Information Warfare Act together. So this submarine, folks, everything has to go right on a submarine or you wind up with the USS Thresher, right? So this thing suffered the detonation of at least 1,000 pounds of explosives within, I don't know, let's say 20 meters of the boat. As far as I'm concerned, this thing is, she's going to be welded to the pier if she hasn't sunk already. So
Yeah. Yeah. The Thresher, of course, was the U.S. submarine back in the 1960s, I believe, that had a fatal dive. And they've never really figured out what happened to the Thresher.
No, she was on her shakedown cruise, and, it only takes one or two things to go wrong.
Yeah.
So the Navy has an entire program that came in after the Thresher called SubSafe, and they are absolute perfectionists. And there has never been an accident on a U.S. nuclear submarine.
Right.
And it's really saying things, especially when you look at the history of the Russian nuclear submarine fleet, and it isn't too good.
No. Well, Russian disinformation is not going to be able to cover up what happened in Novorossiysk, just as it's not succeeding in covering up what is happening in Kupyansk and Pokrovsk. And I think we're going to start in Kupyansk, Chuck, because this is where Gerasimov and the local commander boasted to Vladimir Putin that not only had Kupyansk fallen, but there were 2 battalions of Ukrainians surrounded in Kupyansk.
Think bigger, Alan. He said that 14 battalions were surrounded.
Okay.
Taken the city. So if there are 14 battalions in your city, I think we're talking about Vicksburg or Petersburg, and we're not talking about a city you control. I can't remember the unfortunate general's name, and I don't think he can remember it at this point, but he accepted Hero of the Soviet Union for his diligent performance of his duties in Kupyansk, and 72 hours later, they were run out of the city except for 2 small pockets that are right around the junctions, the major highway junctions there. I think that's the P79, and you got me on the east-west road, but
the failure of Russia in Kupyansk happened so quickly. It collapsed overnight.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a lot, Alan, that things are hard to do in the military, but the easiest thing to do is attack. Go over there and stick this in the other guy's guts. Do this. But the hardest thing to do is break contact with the enemy. I don't want to fight anymore for whatever reason. I'm going to fall back. That takes every unit has to do exactly what it says it's going to do. Cover me, I'm falling back, and everyone else just runs. Alan, you identified early that, the Russian units that were in Kupyansk were being supplied across a wide open area without cover, concealment, and that finally was their undoing because Ukraine interdicted those ground lines of communication and supply. And folks, you can go through 1,000 rounds of ammo pretty quick when you're surrounded. How would I know? Don't ask me.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the Kupyansk map as we speak, Chuck. It's the H26 that intersects with the P79. But the Russian collapse in Kupyansk happened so quickly, and the Ukrainians really do have them on the run. Wouldn't it be wonderful to see the Ukrainians keep the Russians running? But they can't do that, can they?
No, and this is one of those, and there have been several. This is going to be really a strategic opportunity. Why don't the Ukrainians shift forces up here and drive the Russians all the way back to the border? They have too many other things to do right now. The fat's in the fire in Pokrovsk. And let's lay this card right where it belongs in Washington. The Ukrainians cannot trust that Washington will not again turn off all the intelligence, interfere with even transfers of European weapons. They don't dare risk it. But and the other thing was that Kupyansk. There was a fight in the city, but and as Alan and I have been pointing out for a while, two sections of Kupyansk. There is the east part of Kupyansk on the east of the Oskil River, and the upper town in the west, and the Russians had never penetrated the eastern sector of the city, a la Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut.
Yeah. And Ukraine never, ever lost control of Petropavlivka to the east of Kupyansk, and that is high ground itself. It's quite critical to the defense of the eastern side of Kupyansk city.
Right, and again, you can see there when you look to the right, you can see the it isn't much more than a village of Petropavlivka, and you look at all that open terrain up there. There are some bands of forest there which are held in force by the Ukrainian army, but all that white spot is just wide open stuff. And, ground maneuver warfare is not yet obsolete, but no one has solved the problem. How do you get your forces, logistics, reinforcements, beans, Band-Aids, and bullets? How do you get across that open terrain? And you got to pay the piper. And that piper is Ukrainian FPV drones.
Yeah. Well, it would be interesting to see how far the Ukrainians push the Russians here, but the Ukrainians are probably going to put the brakes on themselves.
Yeah, I think so.
Which, as I say, it's just it's too bad that the Ukrainians are in that position, because outside of Kupyansk, the Russians really they need to run, frankly.
Well, the other thing is, that's how wars are won.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You meet an opposing force on the battlefield, you defeat them in battle, and if you want to win, you follow it up, right? You keep chasing them until they fall apart. That's how you win a war. Ukraine, for various reasons, but that's how it's kept on a leash.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason they lost their salient into Kursk was because Washington and the person who sits at the desk where it says the buck stops here decided to pull the intelligence feed.
Yeah.
That's the sole reason, because prior to that, they had inflicted about 60,000 casualties on the Russian forces that had been sent to dislodge them, and they also put a hurting on the North Koreans.
Right.
Put one of their generals on the organ donor list.
That's where the North Koreans first engaged in battle. It was in Kursk, and I don't know where the North Koreans have been deployed to now, Chuck, because there were new North Korean troops that were sent to Ukraine.
Yep, and in the meantime, there are still North Korean ballistic missile troops manning their own ballistic missiles, and they are being fired at Ukrainian cities. So, we don't always drag that back to the surface, but it's still going on.
And more than half of the artillery shells that Russia fires every single year are supplied by North Korea.
Absolutely. And the good thing about North Korean ammunition is it's made in North Korea.
Right. And not always with gunpowder.
Yeah, exactly.
Just, the other thing about Kupyansk, the fact that Ukraine has never been fully equipped, now here coming into basically the fifth winter of the war, the fourth year of the war, but the fifth winter, had Ukraine been fully equipped, had the United States kept its promise and outfitted 10 brigades, That's what the United States promised Ukraine it could and would do. Then you'd see Ukraine break through in a place like Kupyansk, but you won't see it now.
No, you won't. And as we were discussing before we went on, I think what you will see is Ukraine advancing to the north of Kupyansk as far as it is convenient and expedient, and then they're going to mine the hell out of everything and pull back. I mean, that's absolutely what I would do. I'd throw in a little ground seismic sensor so I could tell when things are moving, and I'd be putting some cameras up in trees, and sometimes it literally is that easy, and that's what I think they'd be doing.
And I guess I would put up a sign to help the Russians, pointing towards Kupyansk. Try again.
And again, we see this throughout the war. You don't take a city by infiltrating increasingly numbers of bodies into it and slugging it out with the defenders who are always there. And a defender has such an advantage that you need 5-1 to dislodge one defender. Now you put them in that complex three-dimensional battle space, and you might need 20-1. Why do I say that? Ukraine is outnumbered 20-1 in Pokrovsk, and when's the last time Russia announced that they'd taken Pokrovsk? It's in double digits right now.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's in double digits. I believe it was before the end of November, frankly, that Putin wanted to invite foreign journalists to visit both Kupyansk and Pokrovsk. Now, the thing, and we'll go to the Pokrovsk map next. The important thing in Pokrovsk and Minorod, which is the little town to the east, it's still contested. And I think it will be contested for as long as Ukraine wants to contest it.
So there are at least 150,000 Russians in the Pokrovsk area of operations. They have sustained casualties at the level of a World War I battle, right? So they're not up to the level of the Somme yet, but they're close, right? The 250,000 casualties in taking Avdiivka and moving the 25 miles from Avdiivka to Pokrovsk, 250,000 casualties. That makes it the most costly victory in the last 50 years. No other army on earth has sustained 250,000 casualties in one area of operations in at least the last 50 years. And 1 in 5 casualties in Ukraine have fallen within 25 miles of Pokrovsk.
Wow.
And this is what I say to the Russian trolls who tell me blah, blah, blah every day. And I've taken to bonking the occasional one now. I used to just ignore them. Now I bonk. I like bonk because it's a noun and a verb, and I like words that are nouns and verbs. But this is a Pyrrhic victory if it is ever even going to be a victory.
The Russians can't even decide on a set of tactics to use to seize this area. And it's more than just Pokrovsk. It's Pokrovsk, it's Rodinsky to the north, it's Minorod to the east. They're all tied together, as was Moskovsky. And when I say this area is contested, Chuck, I mean, you can see the M32, the M30, and the rail line. These are all contested routes for both the Russians and the Ukrainians.
Absolutely. And you can see on this map there are solid darker red areas that are under Russian control. And then this patchwork of pale pink. And if you look real closely and zoom into the map, so you can take a screen grab right now and then put it on your desktop and blow it up, you can see that the Russian places where they advance, they are concurrent with those tree lines, etc. But these pink zones right here those are, I'm calling them zones of intermediate contact, meaning anybody can run into anybody at this on this terrain. So a Ukrainian patrol could run into a small tactical element of Russian infiltrators. And what Alan is talking about, look, there was a way to take Pokrovsk. You blast through Rodinsky and you turn southwest and you blast up through Kutry and you turn to the northeast and you meet right there at Hystereene. That's how you take Pokrovsk. The interesting thing about this war, the larger the force the Russians put together, the more quickly it is put away, right? Which is why they've gone to twosies and threesies and infiltration by squad. Because just today, and we can, Thomas has this footage as well, a Russian fast-moving assault group with dune buggies, so help me God, quad bikes and motorcycles, was driving towards Hystereene, and they came to grief.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at that video, folks, they went right down a road in daylight, and they were little black dots against what? Pristine white snow. And they got hosed.
Yeah. Well, you can see the difference that the weather is making in Pokrovsk, and it's also making a difference in Kupyansk. It's making a difference in Vovchansk. It's cold. It's snowy. I think there's snow in the forecast over the next few days, but it's at the freezing mark in Pokrovsk right now. So it's 30 degrees, 29, 28 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's at the freezing mark. Makes it very difficult. I think probably more difficult for the Russians to stay warm and fed and supplied in really were pretty exposed locations for them, even in the reddest, the deepest red of the city of Pokrovsk on this map.
Yeah, and I think that the hardest place I ever had to operate was a place where it snowed one day and rained the next day all day. Then it snowed again because your gear gets wet, and Gore-Tex is only good for about 36 hours in the rain, and then you might as well just take it off. And of course, the Russians don't have Gore-Tex, right? They've got, they've got whatever came, from the storage depot. And I'm happy to remind everybody that 3 years ago, 1 million winter uniforms for Russia disappeared from a warehouse in Siberia, and nobody knows where they went. But I think if you went to a surplus store in Germany, you could probably pick up some Russian winter warfare gear.
Yeah, or maybe in North Korea.
Maybe in North Korea.
Yeah.
And just as Alan was saying, so in this urban fighting, it's the Russians who are compelled by higher authority to attack. And, you are a Ukrainian defender. You can wait there in your nice, warm, wrecked building because these idiots are going to come to you every morning.
Yeah. So the other thing that's happening in Pokrovsk is actually happening down the road towards Kostyantynivka. Even though the Russians concentrated 150, 160,000 troops here, according to General Syrskyi, the Ukrainian commander, it seems likely that Russia has dispersed those troops now to fight in other places along the Zero line. This is also why Russia is having so much trouble taking Pokrovsk itself.
And I think that there is I am not impressed with the talent of the flag officers, the admirals and generals that have come up under Putin. They don't have any military skills. And, we see this in their daily performance of duties in places like Pokrovsk. But as you move up the chain, you need some talented individuals. I'm looking at you, General Hodges, who can keep more than one ball in the air at the time. And you have competent staff officers who can run a multi-dimensional campaign. I'm not sure any of these clowns can do it. They don't get promoted on merit. They don't get deep selected because they're bright young things at the war college. These are guys who are mafia dudes, right? They're mafioso, and They're promoted on the basis of their loyalty and how much they can kick up.
Yeah.
So you've got battle problems like this. And, there's no other army in the world that would keep feeding bodies into this three-dimensional kill space that is Pokrovsk. Boy, and we saw it in Bakhmut. We saw it in Severodonetsk. We've seen it everywhere that Ukraine decided for a time to fight in an urban area. And when that attritional battle, when Ukraine thought, look, this isn't worth the candle anymore, we're pulling out. And that may still happen in Pokrovsk. But they've 20% of all the Russian casualties in Ukraine have been inflicted in Pokrovsk. Maybe that's enough for General Sersky. I don't know. I might keep fighting if the math is, in your favor. Russia is fighting. They're pouring guys in here. General Sersky is probably going to show them, look, you're not going to win like this.
Yeah. The map is in Ukraine's favor, and so is the weather in Ukraine's favor. And so are the defensive positions that Ukraine has managed to hold throughout this battle around Pokrovsk. So end of November, a lot of people were saying Pokrovsk will fall within a matter of days. We are less than we're about a week away from Christmas now. Well, give me your best guess here, Chuck. Will we be fighting in Pokrovsk in the new year?
That's entirely possible. It's hard to project farther than a week or two in the future. Will Pokrovsk fall in the next 2 weeks? No, I don't think so. And the other thing that is it's hurting Russian sustainment. The snow and the mud, and pretty soon it'll just be all snow and ice. It makes logistics much harder. And Alan and I were talking about this. Then get off the, large general officer view of things. Go back down to the rifle squad. The Russians are continually forced to attack. So you get up and you're a Ukrainian commander. You know what's going to happen every day. You know what the Russians are going to do. They're going to come at your position. And the drones simply go up in the morning and they look for the trail of footprints in the snow that weren't there that last night. And it is just that easy, Alan. And then that drone says, hey, I need a thermal over here. Thermal comes over and goes, 20 guys in a bush right there at this 8-digit grid coordinate, and poof.
So, yes, we could very well be fighting in Pokrovsk into the new year. Now, what about peace talks? The peace talks seem more of a distraction and primarily a platform for Russian propaganda, and all that propaganda has an audience of one. His name is Donald Trump.
Yeah, you can't. The Russians are not in a position to negotiate, and why do I mean that? They're making these maximalist demands, right? We want all of Donetsk. We want all of Zaporizhzhia. We want everything that we haven't been able to achieve on the battlefield. We want you to give to us. And I was reading some projections today from the Institute for the Study of War. There is still 23% of Donetsk that Russia hasn't captured. And they project 2.5 years of more fighting, losing 360,000 Russians a year. So we're looking at, 600,000 or 700,000 more Russians just in Donetsk, just to take Donetsk. Look, I don't have any doubt that Putin still thinks this is achievable.
Yeah.
Right. He made a hero of Russia out of a guy who was lying to him and said he took Kupyansk, and he made somebody the admiral of the fleet who just got a submarine sunk in the most farthest and safest and best protected naval base they had in the Black Sea. Again, it's that level of incompetence. And this is not a system, Alan, that is going to pluck a good general out of the field and give him a chance to run the big machine, right? We saw what's happened to VDV generals that were beloved by their men and complained about being wasted. Those guys disappeared, gone.
Yeah.
So this is a system that is not going to correct itself. And it's just going to be more attritional fighting. And as we pointed out, we'll take a little look at where to go next after Pokrovsk, and we are literally looking at 50 or 60 miles of open country.
Right. Well, the one thing I think the peace talks are probably doing is lengthening the war. And the other thing that is lengthening the war is Putin's determination. No one wants peace or a ceasefire more than the Ukrainian people, including the Ukrainians living anywhere in Ukraine. In Odessa tonight, Chuck, Odessa will be in its 5th night without power. This is a city of more than 1 million people.
Beautiful, beautiful place. An amazing, there's old, ancient culture there, 1,000 years old, and then there's these incredible 5-star resorts. There isn't any place like it, really.
No.
But again, this is Russia pumping ballistic missiles into Ukrainian cities, right? And Ukraine does not have the tools in which to indulge their vengeance. They take it out on Russian oil refineries, and they take it out on S-400 batteries. And that's why this war is not going well for Putin. And, look, he's the author of this war. This was his big idea, right? This was how he was going to put himself on par with Peter the Great. Not my words, folks, his.
Right.
Megalomaniacal little walnut brain. That's where he thinks he is. There's this old expression that the British Army used to have saying, "I've captured a Tartar," which, by the way, remember the haircut that our medical director had?
Yes.
Ran into this incredible surgeon, and he had himself a Cossack haircut. This is a medical doctor and a battlefield surgeon, and man, he was a badass.
Yeah. He was. I hope we see him again when we're back in Ukraine this spring. No telling where he will be, but somewhere close to the front. There's no question about that. So we're not going to get a Christmas ceasefire. It's quite unlikely. We're not going to get a Trump peace plan. That's equally unlikely. And we're not going to have a chance to celebrate total Ukrainian victory either, because the only thing that would make that possible is fully arming Ukraine. And this is the one thing that has not been done. And now Ukraine is paying the ultimate consequence for that, and that is to have to fight Russia in a war that will go on and on and on.
Yeah, and that's what we fondly call the Brewer Doctrine here, folks. The only thing that hasn't been tried is to give Ukraine all the tools it needs to fight the bear that broke into its log cabin. And it's simply, it is that simple. And, I'll point out to everyone, look, the United States wouldn't give them harpoons, so they literally made them themselves, right? I'm sure that we haven't given them swimmer delivery vehicles like we use in the SEALs, so they make remote control ones. There's a lot to be learned from Ukraine, and what was done at Novorossiysk could be done at any American submarine base as well. The technology exists, and if you happen to have a Ukrainian engineer in your pocket, then I think you're pretty likely to achieve some pretty high bar operations.
Well, I'm pretty sure Chuck and I will be back one more time before Christmas. And then we will celebrate the holidays between Christmas and New Year's with a couple of reports here. And who knows? Who knows what we'll see? Maybe the Ukrainians will keep the Russians on the run outside Kupyansk. Maybe Pokrovsk will remain contested for weeks and weeks more. There's just no telling. But we will be here to say Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava. Thanks, folks. We see the viewer numbers going up. We thank you so much. We read all the comments, and if you've got some questions too you'd like to ask, we'll scan those and we'll see if we can get to those as well. But thank you so much.